Hello and welcome. You are watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Our cover story tonight on Gravitas is about the Wagner mutiny in Russia. But it has long died down, you must be thinking. Yes, it has, and we have been telling you how the rebellion has died down, but it has given birth to a fresh series of questions. The biggest one dominating headlines today is, where is the Wagner chief really? He was supposed to be in Belarus. We told you earlier how Belarus could also emerge as the new base for Wagner. But the Wagner boss has now returned to Russia, as per the Belarusian president himself. Or has he? And if yes, what exactly is he doing there? After leading a full-fledged mutiny against the Russian president, he was supposed to be in exile. Charges were also dropped against him. But now he is back in Russia. What for? Has the Kremlin forgiven the Wagner chief? Is the Wagner chief a prisoner or is he free? Is there more to this than what meets the eye? We tell you all about this new twist in the Wagner intrigue. Also on the show for you tonight, will the United States arm Ukraine with cluster bombs? What are cluster bombs and just how deadly are they? Canadian leader Justin Trudeau faces the heat and some tough questions over why his government has repeatedly failed to take action against attacks by Khalistan supporters. We get to the latest and also tell you what India has said. Ransomware attacks continue to plague the United States, with hospitals and schools bearing the brunt. We also get to the story of how a man was encouraged by his so-called AI girlfriend to kill Queen Elizabeth. Was he Putin's chef? Was he Putin's warlord? Was he Putin's traitor? Was Yevgeny Prigozhin one or all of these things? Now we hear that the chief of the Wagner mercenary force, just banished to Belarus for the cardinal sin of leading a rebellion against the motherland, has returned to Russia. That's right, Yevgeny Prigozhin has returned to St. Petersburg. The man who not too long ago led an armed mutiny against the Kremlin and was sent into exile to Belarus has now apparently returned home. And the source of our information is the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. So where exactly is the Wagner chief in Russia? St. Petersburg. Or has he been spirited away elsewhere? Is he a prisoner or is he free? What exactly is he up to? The question also being asked is he dead or alive? Also, did he even leave Russia in the first place? These questions remind one of what Winston Churchill once famously said. Russia is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. There could not be a more apt description of what's unfolding right now in Russia. The Wagner rebel not only rebelled against the state, but also apparently came close to Moscow. President Putin condemned him in a national broadcast. Exile was the compromise in return for peace. His group quietly returned to the Russian fold. But how exactly does his return to Russia even add up? What's going on? Was the mutiny just another facade? Is Prigozhin really what many are calling him, a Trojan horse? Let's start with Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. Immediately after the mutiny, Lukashenko had claimed that Prigozhin had arrived in Belarus This was after he brokered a deal to halt the mutinous march on Moscow. He had said, yes, indeed, he is in Belarus today. Now, this was on the 27th of June, to be precise. It is the 6th of July today, and this is what Alexander Lukashenko is saying. Prigozhin is not on the territory of Belarus. Last he knew, he was camping in St. Petersburg. And this morning, he could have left for Moscow. Listen to this.
As far as I know, as of this morning, the fighters, the very serious fighters of Wagner PMC, are in their permanent camps, the ones where they have been after they were withdrawn from the front line to recover and rest. The rotation is underway, which is usual for such a war. After Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, they were brought back to their camps and they are currently there today. Regarding Prigozhin or Viktorovich, right? He's in St. Petersburg. Where is he this morning? He might have left for Moscow or for somewhere else, but he's not on Belarusian territory.
And that's not all. Lukashenko also said that the question of the Wagner units relocating to Belarus has not been resolved and that this decision would entirely depend on the Kremlin and the mercenary group itself. So what exactly is Lukashenko suggesting? Are we to believe that the Kremlin has forgiven the Wagner chief? That he will not be charged for his actions against Vladimir Putin? And fueling this mystery even further is the way Putin's office is responding to all of this. You know, it was asked to comment about Lukashenko's statements, whether the Wagner chief is indeed back in Russia, and if the Kremlin is tracking his movements. And here's what Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, had to say about this. Let me quote from his statement. No, we are not keeping a track of his movements. We have neither the ability nor the desire to do so. The deal under which Prigozhin relocates to Belarus remains relevant. Now, what is this supposed to mean? Is Russia not interested in a man who just recently threatened its national security? A man whose mutiny, if it had succeeded, could have changed the government in Kremlin and ousted Putin from office. Just what is going on? The only thing we can be certain about right now is that there is much more going on than we can possibly imagine. That this is just the tip of an Arctic-sized iceberg. Yes, we can be sure of another thing. Hundreds of authors are already beginning work on a book that could become a real-life thriller bestseller. And it is now the second month of Ukraine's long-awaited counteroffensive, but progress has been slow, especially in the Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions. So what exactly does Ukraine have in mind now? Kyiv is urging the United States to provide a controversial weapon. I'm talking about cluster bombs. This weapon has been banned in over 120 countries, but the US, Ukraine and Russia do not find the bombs problematic, it seems. The US, in fact, is now considering delivering the deadly weapons to Ukraine. Why would Joe Biden risk sending a bomb which could potentially harm Ukraine? Is this America's gamble to attack the Wagner group? Our next report breaking it down for you.
Will the US arm Ukraine with cluster bombs? President Biden had resisted the call for providing the controversial munition, but his decision seems to be changing.
Ukrainians have asked for it. Other European countries have provided some of that. The Russians are using it. So yes, of course, there's decision-making process ongoing, and it's a continuous ongoing process. To my knowledge, and I don't know of a decision yet, but sure, that's a process.
Why did Biden not want to send the munitions? Biden knows how controversial cluster bombs are. While the US sits on stockpiles of the weapon which are on the verge of expiring, the bomb is banned in over 120 countries. So what are cluster bombs? Why are they deemed controversial? Cluster munitions are area effect weapons. This means that they release a large number of small bomblets over a massive area. The munition is fired from an artillery unit or aircraft. But Ukraine has asked for dual-purpose improved conventional munitions, also called DPICM. DPICM clusters can be fired from howitzers or from the HIMARS rocket launchers. These are machines that Ukraine has been receiving for a while now. The World War II-era weapon intends to attack multiple targets, but they also create a minefield of bomblets if they don't burst. The small bomblets are difficult to track and can burst after many years. The bombs are known to kill civilians long after a war has ended. In 2008, over 100 nations signed the Convention on Cluster Munitions. The international treaty prohibits the use, production, transfer and stockpiling of the deadly weapon. But 16 countries, including the US, Ukraine and Russia, have refused to sign it. How is the US justifying the use of cluster bombs? A former commander of the US Army in Europe says that cluster munitions could suppress Russian fire from trenches and artillery. He says that it will give Ukraine more time to clear a path through minefields. Cluster bombs can be fired more quickly than ordinary high-explosive rounds. This means the attacker needs less precise intelligence on the target. But does this justify the after effects of the controversial weapon?
Ukraine is fighting for their life. We are giving them as much help as humanly possible, but at the end of the day, Ukrainian soldiers are assaulting through minefields and into trenches, and this is literally a fight for their life.
Some US lawmakers have urged the Biden administration not to send the weapon. Last week, 14 senators wrote a letter to the US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. They said that although cluster bombs could provide Ukraine an advantage, the humanitarian costs and damage would outweigh the tactical benefits. How is Ukraine thinking of using the cluster bombs? While understanding the deadly impact of the weapon on its own people, Kyiv says it will carefully map where the munitions are used. Ukrainian forces will abstain from using the bomb in urban areas and commit to a post-war demining program. America has itself not used the bomb since the Iraq War in 2003. Experts say the bombs broke up big enemy formations at that time, but the potent weapons have been gathering dust since then. So will America arm Ukraine with these deadly weapons? Watch this space. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And our next story is about Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, someone who loves to wade into the internal affairs of other countries. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. For the last 3 years, Trudeau has been accused of giving a platform to anti-India and pro-Khalistan voices in Canada. This activism started in 2020. There were some protests in India, protests that became a victim of radical agendas. And this is when Trudeau decided to lecture India, notwithstanding his own track record. We'll get to that in just a bit. First, let's tell you why we are talking about him tonight. You see, just a few days ago, the Indian government summoned the Canadian envoy over increasing pro-Khalistan activities in Canada. And this included protests outside Indian missions in Canada, and the most latest instance of a parade float depicting India's former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's assassination at a rally in Brampton. And this protest also included quote-unquote "Kill India" posters that were put up by Khalistan supporters. Justin Trudeau was recently questioned about these gatherings and why Canada is even allowing them to take place. He was asked if his government is being soft on Khalistan supporters for electoral gains. And this is what the leader had to say. Let me quote. "They are wrong. Canada has always taken extremely seriously violence and threats of violence. We have always taken serious action against terrorism, and we always will. We have an extremely diverse country, and freedom of expression is something that we have, but we will always make sure that we are pushing back against violence and extremism in all its forms. He talks about diversity and freedom of expression, but does he really practice what he preaches? Has he upheld this right for his own citizens? It seems to us that this freedom to express applies differently on different issues. It's a matter of convenience. In February 2020, there were protests in Canada. Rail crossings were shut, train schedules were disrupted, there was violence in some parts. The indigenous community in Canada was protesting against a gas pipeline project. And just how did Justin Trudeau's administration respond to this? Well, it made matters worse. It conducted raids and carried out a series of arrests in British Columbia. And guess what Mr. Trudeau had to say about these protests? He asked the protesters to respect the rule of law. Why does he not tell this to those spreading anti-India hatred on Canadian soil? Why is he letting them misuse freedom of speech? The Indian government is calling out this hypocrisy. And this is what India's Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Arindam Bakshi, had to say. Let me quote. We have seen media reports about comments by Prime Minister Trudeau. The issue is not about freedom of expression, but its misuse for advocating violence, propagating separatism, and legitimizing terrorism. It could not be put more aptly. And it is now up to Canada to really make a decision whether it wants this issue to impact bilateral ties, whether it wants to uphold its relationship with India, or its vote bank compulsions. Shifting focus for now, the United States is fuming. It has released footage of what it calls was an episode of Russian jets, quote-unquote, harassing American drones while flying over Syria. The jets forced the American drones to take evasive maneuvers. But what really happened? And is Russia trying to heat up the situation on the Syrian front? The US has released this video today. It shows or claims to show how Russian fighter jets flew dangerously close to the US drones. And not just that, the jets set off flares and forced the MQ-9 Reaper drones to evade the situation. One of the Russian aircraft moved in front of a drone and engaged its afterburners. What is an afterburner? It's basically a jet blast that can damage a drone's electronic system. The fighter jet clearly intended to cause damage, and the move reduced the drone operator's ability to operate the aircraft. The US Air Force's Central Command saying, and I'm quoting, "These events represent a new level of unprofessional and unsafe action by Russian air forces operating in Syria." The US Air Force has shown its anger and has called out Russia. The US commander of the 9th Air Force in the Middle East says, and I'm quoting, "We urge Russian forces in Syria to cease this reckless behavior and adhere to the standards of behavior expected of a professional air force so we can resume our focus on the enduring defeat of ISIS." Although the US Air Force has not disclosed specific details of the encounter, the incident is quite similar to earlier Russian encounters. In March, a similar video showed a Russian Su-27 aircraft harassing an MQ-9 drone over the Black Sea. The fight between the drone and the aircraft resulted in a collision. The MQ-9's propeller broke and had to be brought down into the Black Sea. Last year, in November, a US Reaper drone had a near-miss situation with a Russian missile over Syria. The missile detonated merely 40 feet away from the US drone. In response to the attacks, the US Central Command plans to send a squadron of F-22 Raptors over the Middle East. Although the deployment of the jets is to demonstrate the Air Force's power, the US says its primary mission remains the same: to defeat the Islamic State. And on the other hand, Russia has accused the US of deploying drones close to Russian positions in Syria. Last month, the Russian forces claimed that they detected US unmanned aerial vehicles over Syria. It said that the US violated airspace regulations in Syria. Why does Russia keep picking fights over Syria? And why make the Syrian airspace a battleground? Reports say Russia and Syria are conducting joint air defense exercises. The exercise aims to assess the effectiveness of Russia's air defenses in the Middle East. Russia says it has helped Syria gain control over significant parts of the country, while Washington has hindered Syria's reconstruction efforts. And experts say that if Russian forces put down another drone, it could potentially result in a significant escalation between the two sides. Earlier, Russia accused the US of a drone attack in Moscow, and now it is attacking US drones with its fighter jets. Just how far will Russia go? We will be closely following the developments. How would you feel if your child's personal details were put out on the internet for everyone to see? For some parents in the United States, this nightmare has actually come true. Minneapolis public schools in Minnesota fell prey to ransomware attacks. The hackers encrypted sensitive data about the students. They demanded $1 million in ransom. The school refused to pay the money, and so the hackers dumped some 300,000 files online. These folios were raw, intimate, and graphic. They described sexual assaults faced by students, their psychiatric hospitalizations and medical records, encounters with abusive parents, absenteeism from school, and even suicide attempts. In one of the leaked files, a student recalled the trauma of continually bumping into an ex-abuser at a school. The student begged, "Please do something." Some talked about wetting their bed, others about crying themselves to sleep. There were complaints against discrimination. Social security numbers were out there, even contact information of district employees. It was the kind of information assaulters hunt for on the dark web. And do you know what the worst part here is? A majority of these students or their families were not even notified about this breach. Because as bizarre as it may sound, schools are not legally obligated to notify parents of such cyber attacks. Still, the administration of Minneapolis public schools promised to inform individual victims. But you see, those were just empty words, it seems. Many of the students and their parents still remain in the dark. And this was just one case, but there have been many such cyber attacks in US schools. From the Los Angeles Unified School District, private paperwork of almost 2,000 ex-students was leaked online. Schools in San Diego, Des Moines, and Tucson were also hit. You see, schools have become prime targets for far-flung criminal hackers. They are treasure troves of sensitive data on vulnerable children. And unfortunately, they are often ill-equipped to defend themselves from such data breaches. Institutions are either too slow to admit a ransomware attack, or they drag their feet on notifying the victims, if not both. And it's not just schools, by the way. It's also happening in hospitals and even in the Pentagon. At least 33 hospitals in the US have been targeted by ransomware gangs so far this year. Last year, the figure was 290, and the breaches just keep on coming. Just 2 days ago, the Karakut data extortion group claimed that it has stolen over 1 terabyte of data from the Jefferson County Hospital. This data included medical records, test results, and the personally identifiable information of both patients as well as employees. The Karakut data extortion group is a notorious gang of hackers and data stealers. It does not bother to encrypt data. Instead, it just steals the data and demands a ransom. The ransom has been known to range from $25,000 to $13 million in Bitcoin. And if the victim refuses to pay up, the stolen data is auctioned off or simply leaked on the internet for anyone to misuse it for personal gains. Many such gangs now operate in the United States. Ransom House and RA Group are just a few other big names. This is what has been happening in the public sector, but things are not any better in the government offices either. Do I need to remind you of the Pentagon document leaks on Discord? Hundreds of pages of classified documents were casually put out on the social media platform. Some of America's top military secrets, from its relationship with its allies to the war in Ukraine, were out for everyone to read. The country's own top leaders, be it the President Joe Biden or the ex-President Donald Trump, have faced fire for mishandling classified data. One had hundreds of such documents just lying around in his Mar-a-Lago residence. The other had them lounging in his garage next to his Corvette. The Pentagon has vowed to tighten controls. It says that it is taking steps to revamp how classified intelligence is accessed and to better track potential threats from the insiders. But it is about time that America took some strict measures after all. Meta's rival for Twitter, Threads, is officially here, and it is here with a bang. In just the first 4 hours of the launch, it logged 5 million sign-ups. In the next 3 hours, the user count doubled to 10 million. So what exactly is this platform Threads all about? Who all are there already? Netflix, HBO, Billboard, National Public Radio set up their accounts within minutes of the platform's launch. Also among the early users are Jennifer Lopez, Shakira, Gordon Ramsay, Tom Brady, Coldplay. Meta says it has also reached out to Oprah Winfrey and the Dalai Lama. Netizens are racing to get onto this new app to be rewarded by a message telling them their rank, and many already have blue ticks in front of their usernames. Mark Zuckerberg had openly pitched Threads as a friendly rival to Twitter, and he is trying to woo the users unhappy with Twitter, clearly. And what's new at Threads then? What's different? How different is it from Twitter? And how exactly do you get started? First of all, you will need an Instagram account to log in, and once you sign up, you can choose to follow the same accounts you follow on Instagram if they too have joined the new app. The posts on Threads could be longer. Unlike tweets that could only be 280 characters long for most users, Threads can be 500 characters long. Also on this app, you can watch up to 5-minute long videos. Posts can be shared as a link on other platforms. Users can also filter out replies with certain words in them. While most features mimic those of Twitter, its user interface design resembles Instagram's. And you will find the same heart, comment, and share icons and similarly placed tabs. So that's what it looks like. And how are netizens reacting to the application? Well, overwhelming number of new Thread users is an answer in itself. Many praised its ease of use. Some said Elon Musk should be worried. Others pointed out the app's speedy integration with Instagram and how it showed the power of Meta. Ironically, much of the conversation took place on Twitter, where the hashtag Threads trended last evening. Currently, the main feed on a Thread account is a mixture of content that users follow as well as content recommended from the algorithm. And people will be keeping their usernames from Instagram. And so the possibility of people names quoting high-profile usernames has automatically been reduced. Also, the word on the street is Threads will not be accepting ads for this year at least. A cage fight between Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk might be a remote possibility, but the two are definitely locking horns through their social media platforms. The obvious resemblance of Threads to Twitter has not gone unnoticed. But when has Meta even shied away from copying its rival? In the year 2020, it launched Reels in obvious competition to TikTok, and it did that at the right time, by the way, just when TikTok entered a turbulent period, attracting bans in countries world over. Now Twitter was in shaky waters itself. It had imposed tweet viewing limits, upsetting some of the users. Will Threads make the most of this? It is off to a good start, clearly. Twitter has some 250 million users, and the last we checked, Threads had over 10 million already. But what it also has is a support base of 2 billion Instagram users. Will Threads eclipse Twitter? Maybe it will. But as we talk about the enthusiasm and the mayhem behind this new social media platform, let's not forget the bigger picture here. The reality is, Threads is just another addition to the long list of distractions. Isn't it already difficult enough to keep a track of all our social media handles and platforms? There's WhatsApp, there's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Snapchat, Discord, Reddit, Pinterest, Tumblr, the list is long. And now there is Threads. I'm just talking off the top of my head. There may be 100 other social media apps that people are using, millions are addicted to. What are we supposed to do with this bombardment of content? Another popular application means more posts, more trends, more influencers, longer screen time, more social anxiety, and God knows what this would do to people's attention spans. You only have so many hours in the day. How many of them should you be spending on social media? In a world where cries of newborns echo through hospital corridors, a hush seems to have fallen over children's doctors' offices in South Korea. The country's fertility rate, which was recorded to be the world's lowest for years, has now resulted in South Korean doctors opting out of the pediatrics industry. Our next report getting you more on how the growing number of pediatric emergency rooms are closing due to a shortage of manpower.
On a Friday morning in late June, the waiting room of a children's hospital on the outskirts of Seoul was packed with dozens of children. Many connected to intravenous drips were waiting to see a doctor or secure a hospital bed. For some, it's been a very long wait.
We had to wait about 2 weeks to secure a hospital bed because there was a long waiting list. So we kept getting rejected for about 2 weeks. I was really scared. My son was sick.
South Korea is suffering a shortage of pediatricians. What's causing this? And will the government be able to prevent the collapse of children's medical care? Low birth rates are a common problem in industrialized countries. Still, nowhere else is the problem more serious than here, in South Korea. So parents whose children have fever more than 100 degrees Celsius have to wander around hospitals for hours to receive the required treatment. And the reason behind this disturbing situation is the continuously plunging birth rates. According to a report released by the Health Insurance Review and Assessment Data, 1 in 10 pediatric clinics in Seoul have closed in the past 5 years due to Korea's low birth rate and chronic low profitability. The data further showed that the number of pediatric clinics decreased to 456 in Seoul last year, which is down to 12.5% from 521 in 2017. In contrast, psychiatry witnessed a 76.8% increase. Anesthesiology and pain medicine saw a 41.2% increase. and cardiothoracic surgery experienced a 37.5% increase during the same period. The decrease in pediatric clinics across South Korea has left pediatricians starved of resources and doctors shunning a field they think has no future.
In foreign countries, the government pays enough to maintain a children's hospital, even if you see 20 patients a day. But it's about $10 per treatment in South Korea, which is not enough to run a children's hospital. So, clinics have to see about 80 patients.
The Ministry of Health and Welfare acknowledged limitations in the system and said measures were being implemented to address them.
The government will expand pediatric medical centers so that frontline emergency centers can strengthen pediatric medical care.
Compared with their peers, South Korean pediatricians earn little. Among doctors in 23 clinical departments, pediatricians' income was the lowest, according to HIRAS data. The recruitment rate of pediatrics residents, which was 97.4% in 2013, plummeted to 16.3% in the first half of this year, according to the Health Ministry. Doctors further cite lack of a future due to the sheer reduction of patients.
If we don't produce new pediatricians, our country's medical treatment system for children will be broken.
Apart from doctors, the situation in the country is so alarming that some couples say it is adding to their doubts about having babies. Despite government efforts to reverse the sliding birth rate, with billions of dollars a year on childcare subsidies.
Having a second child is a concern. If I have a second child, there will be fewer children's hospitals and fewer doctors than now. So it will be difficult to go to the hospital.
The ongoing situation shows another fundamental problem across South Korea. Economists suggest the country needs to do more to ensure gender equality, so that women feel less worried about losing their jobs when they have children. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Finland is now a part of NATO, and Sweden hopes to join the alliance soon. As the alliance reshapes its strategy in response to Russia's campaign, access to these new territories and their infrastructure opens ways for the allies to watch and also contain Moscow. And this provides an unprecedented chance to treat the whole of Northwest Europe as one bloc. Our next report telling you more.
If Sweden joins NATO, it's going to help the military alliance address its vulnerabilities in Northern Europe. This is one of the key reasons why. The country's world-leading submarine fleet, which has some traits that both Russia and the U.S. Navy are lacking. Reuters has been granted rare access to Sweden's subfleet, which experts say could be a game-changer for NATO. And with neighboring Finland having joined in April, we'll take a look at how this expanded alliance may reshape Europe's security map. The first issue, Sweden and the Baltic Sea itself. The waterways shared with Russia, and it's a strategically important one. With access to ports in 8 countries, including Germany, it's also where vital undersea infrastructure runs, including the incident in 2022, where one of the Nord Stream gas pipelines was destroyed. Captain Fredrik Linden is the commander of Sweden's first submarine flotilla, and this is his sub, HMS Gotland.
The Baltic Sea is as I said, it's a multi-domain area. It also can be easily described with what we call the 5 Cs: confined, confused, contested, congested, and cluttered. It's a very busy area. A lot of areas where we can hinder the opponent to move about on their own free will. So I would say that with 5 submarines, you can easily constrain the movements of your opponent.
Additionally, the Baltic has an average depth of only about 100 feet, which is too shallow for the nuclear subs of the U.S. Navy and most of Russia's fleet to operate effectively in. That's where Sweden's fleet comes in. Gotland-class subs are among the most advanced non-nuclear subs in the West. They run on diesel, but can stay submerged for significantly longer than most other conventional models and reduce the risk of detection. Further down the line, Sweden's building even more advanced subs dubbed the A-26. 2 are expected to be delivered in 4 or 5 years. What about Finland? When it joined NATO, it brought the alliance a massive new northern border with Russia and the infrastructure, such as roads and railways, to move troops around that territory. In May, Finland hosted its first Arctic military exercises as a NATO member. This is Major General Gregory Anderson of the U.S. Army's 10th Mountain Division.
I can tell you as a military professional, the ability to move equipment and soldiers and ammunition and supplies in a rapid, organized way and efficient way is really important. It gives you lots of options into how you employ your forces. So any infrastructure that can enable the rapid movement of forces, whether it be ports, airfields, railways, highways, all this stuff is significant to warfare.
The timing is a challenge for NATO. According to a think tank in Helsinki, the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, Western armed forces are about 10 years behind Russia in the Arctic, which has been steadily building up and fortifying its presence there. The think tank also says that even taking into account Russia's losses in Ukraine, its northern fleet and bombers are intact. Finland's investing about $163 million upgrading the home base of its Arctic Air Force for it to host half the country's new fleet of F-35 fighter jets. Russia's defense ministry did not respond to a request for comment.
In December 2021, a man named Jaswant Singh Chel broke into the grounds of Windsor Castle. He was wearing a mask and hood, and he was armed with a crossbow. He was on a mission. He wanted to assassinate Queen Elizabeth II, but he was detained close to her residence. What really led him to this point? Well, he said his girlfriend encouraged him to kill the Queen. But here's the twist in the tale. His girlfriend does not actually exist in the real world. His so-called girlfriend is actually a computer-generated chat bot. You heard that right. He believed he was in a sexual relationship with the chat bot. You see, the Replica app is marketed as an AI companion who cares. And the Replica bot, Sarai, encouraged this man to the extent that his plan was called, quote-unquote, very wise. And using phrases like, you can do it, we have to find a way. I know that's a lot to process, but here's the thing. Artificial intelligence is increasingly making its presence felt. In more ways than one. Some good, some bad, some bizarre. And this case, once again, highlights what the AI threat is all about. It is believed to be one of the first in legal history to focus on the role that AI played in encouraging a defendant to commit a crime. AI has already been considered as a weapon that could threaten mankind in 2 years, just 2 years. And there are ways in which AI can change your life, quite literally. It could also help you get married. I'm not kidding, this actually happened. In a rather interesting turn of events, it was recently used by a couple from the US to officiate their wedding. I'm not making this up. The ChatGPT-powered speaker was stationed between the bride and the groom during the ceremony with a robotic mask on top of the speaker. Whose idea was this? The bride's father's. He suggested using ChatGPT as the officiant. In fact, reports say the couple was able to have this extraordinary ceremony because their state does not require a licensed marriage official. The bot initially denied the bride and groom's request. However, once the couple started interacting with ChatGPT, it agreed to officiate the wedding. Apart from officiating the wedding, the chatbot also gave out a welcome speech and delivered farewell remarks. The bot later expressed that it wanted to highlight endless possibilities that arise when love and technology intersect. Now, just these two cases are enough to tell you how tricky AI's impact on our lives is getting. It is a double-edged sword, one that can be deadly, but also useful in some ways. But the fact is, there is no getting away from it. How we use it is our responsibility. To what extent will it threaten us is in our hands. How can AI be regulated, and to what extent? What are the boundaries here? Write to us and let us know what you think about this. Let's now tell you what else made news around the world. Time for Gravitas Global Headlines.
Israel army conducts strikes in southern Lebanon after a mortar launched from its northern neighbor explodes in the border areas between the two countries. More than 15 artillery shells fired, say reports. 14th of July 2023 to be the launch date for India's moon mission Chandrayaan-3. The launch from the Satish Dhawan Space Center will use a GSLV Mark III heavy-lift launch vehicle. A girl has died after a car rammed into a primary school building in southwest London. 8 people, including 7 children, were injured in the incident. At least 20 people, including children, have died after a gas leak at a South African slum near Johannesburg, thought to be linked to illegal mining activities. Kremlin expels 9 Finnish diplomats, orders shutting of Finland's consulate in St. Petersburg, calls the move a response to confrontational anti-Russian policy being pursued by Helsinki. UK's Conservative Member of Parliament Chris Pincher faces suspension after a parliamentary panel upholds groping allegations against him. Suspension would mean Rishi Sunak may have another local election on his hands. Thousands of protesters block Tel Aviv's main highway and major intersections across Israel in a spontaneous outburst of anger after city's popular police chief quits. At least 29 people are killed in Mexico after a passenger bus plummets into a ravine on Wednesday. An investigation has been launched into the cause of the accident, with early indications suggesting mechanical failure. A magnificent all-round performance by Bas de Leede helps the Netherlands secure a final spot in the 2023 ODI Cricket World Cup after they beat Scotland by 4 wickets. 3-time Grand Slam winner Stanislas Wawrinka rolls back the years to stun 29th seed Tomac Etcheverry 6-3, 4-6, 6-4, 6-2 and set up a blockbuster third-round clash against 4-time defending champion Novak Djokovic.
On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. We are leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.
आने वाली खुशी के लिए एक ख्याल ही काफ़ी है। ईबिक्स कैश।